So, one of the things I wanted to ask you about is obviously you were one of the early pioneers in SaaS and cloud, got to profitability, and ran the company, I think to be profitable. But I saw you had this once.com where you have a new mission for people to pay for software once. Explain, because you always come up with some ideas that sometimes are quixotic, sometimes they're brilliant, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. Explain once.com.
Sure. So the history is we were one of the earliest SaaS companies. Basecamp was launched in 2004. We didn't even have the SaaS term back then.
Yeah.
And at that time, SaaS was just amazing. It was amazing because running your own software was a total pain in the ass. It was licenses and it was installations and it was system requirements. It was all that stuff. So everyone was so excited when SaaS comes out. Oh, I just have to fill in a form and I can use a piece of software. Amazing. And we jumped on that and have been running Basecamp and a ton of other services, hey.com, our new email service, SaaS businesses, 20 plus years. But one of the things I love is this idea of the pendulum swinging, right? We go from client to server, back to client, back to server. Many times over the history of computing, we've gone from one extreme to the other. I think it's time for that pendulum to swing at least a little bit back towards you being able to buy a software product rather than buying a software service. And that's our thesis with Once, that there is a category of software where it just does not make sense to pay on a monthly basis for it and to pay out the nose for something that is essentially a commodity. That's sort of the two-part play. One here being this is about price, this is about subscription fatigue. And then the second part of it is also about commoditization. We have a bunch of collaboration tools, for example, information systems, that just the innovation is gone, like problems are solved. And when that happens in almost any other domain, someone pioneers a new product or service, they get the market for themselves for a few years, and then at some point, competition moves in. And that's how capitalism is supposed to work. We're supposed to have competition, we're supposed to have alternatives, and we're supposed to have generics. So that's the thesis with Once. We're going to make a series of software products that you can install, run on your own servers, but is essentially web apps. Think WordPress. That's one of the most successful software products out there. If you look at total websites running on the internet, I think it's like 40% of all internet websites run WordPress, and it runs on that model. You download a piece of software, you set it up on your own little server, and what really connects me to that mission is this idea that this is what the internet was supposed to be. SaaS, unfortunately, to some extent, helped the centralization of the internet. First, it was just like, oh, everyone is going to run their version of Basecamp or Hey on our computers. It's just going to be one set of services. Even if we have hundreds of thousands of customers, they're all just running on our computer. So if our computer goes down, Basecamp goes down for 100,000 customers. Now, we have 5 nines of uptime, so it's not been a problem for us. But generally speaking, this idea that we have centralization, on top of that, now we have cloud centralization. So when AWS US East 1 goes down, about a third of the internet goes offline with it, right? That's not what DARPA designed. That's not the internet that I fell in love with. The internet I fell in love with was we can all run our own stuff. I remember running websites back in the 90s. I would just run it on my own box. If my friend's web server went down, it had no impact on mine at all. So I think there's just a lot of these dynamics where we knew some truths when the internet got started that we kind of sort of forgot, or we gave them up for some conveniences that make sense at a time, but no longer do. Now, I'm not saying SaaS is like totally over. Every piece of SaaS software is going to be a product now. I am saying, though, I think there's a surprising amount of SaaS businesses that could be product businesses instead. And that if you make that jump, the cost structure is completely different, which means the pricing structure can be completely different, which means that you can now have competition in areas where you really couldn't before. One of the ones we like to call out is Slack, right? I asked Toby, my friend and CEO at Shopify, hey, Toby, what are you paying for Slack? And he was like, oh, dude, don't even get me started. It's millions, right? Millions a year on recurring revenue to use this SaaS service that's a commodity. I mean, Slack hasn't innovated in a long time. I think since, unless you call that redesign, they just did that everyone hated innovation.
It wasn't great.
It's just, it got bought by Salesforce. This is the natural life cycle of startups. This is what happens. This is not necessarily good or bad or whatever. It's just that this is an example of a piece of software that should be commoditized, but it's difficult to do if you're going to go up against something like SaaS, right? Like what, are you going to price it like 20% cheaper? Or are you going to add 5% more features? That's a tough competition to go up against when you have something entrenched. But imagine if I could go to Topi and say, hey, do you know what? That Slack bill, instead of you paying millions every year, what about you just pay me like $1,000 once? All of a sudden.
Super disruptive. Yeah.
Exactly. You're dealing with orders of magnitude difference. And I think that's what's possible because like I can't outcompete Slack on operations, for example. It takes a lot of people to run SaaS software. It's actually still complicated to have millions of users. You need a lot of operations people. You need sophisticated setup, all this stuff. In the meantime, all these computers have gotten so much faster, so much cheaper. You can now run so much more software on your own. But I think it hasn't clicked. And this is what often happens in technology. Same thing, like iPhone comes out and we go like, oh, a phone. I don't know what we're going to use this with. 5 years later, everyone has figured out exactly what to use this with. We have all this innovation. And I think we're a little bit in that space right now with what's been happening with computers, how fast they've actually gotten just in the last 5, 6, 7 years, how much scale you can have on even the laptop I use for my development is faster than all my cloud computing.
You have an M3, I assume. You got the M3,
exactly.
the new one.
Yes.
It's just
with
bonkers.
that M3, I'm like 16 cores. I'm running like my tests faster than what we're paying astronomical bills to run continuous integration in the cloud. There's something going on. There's something in the water. I think something is brewing, and we're gonna give it a try. Now, ironically, Slack is an example of us being early. Like we had Slack in 2005. It was called Campfire.
Yep.
And we were just like a decade too early. In 2005,
and there was
just did not see
and there
it.
was, what was the one that it wound up getting bought by Atlassian? Maybe that was HipChat.
HipChat, I think.
It was HipChat, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, there were competitors, and now I guess Discord's the only competitor.
But they were too early.
They were too early. There needs to be an open source or, $1,000 and have as many people you want on the server because what they've done now is like I have a Slack for my founders, so all the investments we've made. It's got 700 people in it. And they're like, we want $8 a person a month, $100 a person. I'm like, I'm not paying you whatever this is going to wind up being, $70,000 a year. That's insane for just our founders to talk to each other. So if there was one for $700 or even $7,000, I would actually pay because I can't get the archives. And then I would pop it on a server and run it. And all these clouds are so cheap. I mean, it is amazing your point though about what's happened with Silicon. Like this, I have the M2 MacBook Air with like a terabyte SSD and like 16 gigs of RAM. I cannot believe that for whatever it is, $1,500 or $1,800, their entry level computer is absurd. It is absurd how much power it is. Listen, selling software is hard enough right now, man. It's hand-to-hand combat out there in B2B land. The last thing you need to do is slow your sales team down because you don't have your SOC 2 dialed in. So if you're SaaS or a services company and you store consumer data in the cloud, you know what you need to do? You need to check out Vanta. They're going to get your SOC 2 compliant easier and faster. And Vanta makes it so easy to get and renew your SOC 2. On average, Vanta customers are SOC 2 compliant in just 2 to 4 weeks. Compare that to 3 to 5 months without Vanta. They're going to save you hundreds of hours of work and up to 85% on compliance costs. And Vanta does more than just SOC 2. They also automate up to 90% compliance for GDPR, HIPAA, and more. You can't afford to lose out on those major customers, the lighthouse customers, the big fish, the whales, because of silly stuff like lacking compliance. Just work with Vanta. I'm an investor in the company. It's a great company. Get your compliance automated, get it tight, tight is right, and close those big deals. Here's the best part. Vanta's going to give you $1,000 off because they love This Week in Startups. They love startups. Vanta.com/twist. That's VANTA.com/twist to get $1,000 off your SOC 2.